Welcome and hello, everybody. I'm Paul Rooney, as you can see. I'm one of the long-standing members of CIEM, one of the old school from the early 90s. Helped out with CIEM even when it was IEEM years ago, in various ways. But tonight we're here. I'm in the capacity as the deputy convener for the academic special interest group, and it's an honour and a privilege to have this joint meeting tonight. This is great to join up two special interest groups in our institute. We've got the academic special interest group. We meet regularly on this slot, but also the ecological restoration and habitat creation group. So it's a joint event. If any of you were thinking that this might have been a talk on wind farms, there was a slight administrative error. I don't think there's going to be any hot air tonight. It's going to be really pointed and really good. So it's not a talk on wind farms. It's actually the title of the talk is Habitat Creation and Restoration, the Need for Guidance and Standards. It is sold out. It is full. We'd have a waiting list, which shows just how important this topic is. It's a real hot topic, something that's crucially important for all of us, consultants, NGO workers, academics. This is right at the forefront, and this is one of the reasons why our institute is so good. So after that little bit of introduction, we do have an eminent, I think, speaker, a fellow of our institute, a past president of our institute to speak tonight. But I want to pass over to Tim, who is one of the leaders in the ecological restoration and habitat creation SIG, as this is a joint event, to introduce our speaker. And I'm delighted to hear him tonight and great to see him again. Tim, would you like to introduce our speaker, please?
Thank you, Paul. Yes, so I'm the co-convener for the Ecological Restoration Habitat Creation SIG. So it's great to have you all here on such an important topic to be discussed, basically. So I'm going to be hanging around here as almost a co-host so that I can check the questions coming in. So please do use the chat and things, and I'll be trying to do that just to keep the flow of the kind of questions and answers with John. So it's my pleasure to introduce John Box, who's obviously, I mean, if anybody who knows, as he's been a past president, then he does have a wide experience with habitat creation and ecological restoration. He was a member of the steering group for the RSPB Habitat Creation Handbook for the minerals industry, as well as for the Highways Agency project on habitat translocation, which is still the best book about translocating habitats. That's Habitat Translocation, Best Practice Guide by Penny Anderson, the Syria report. So John's published a huge array of technical papers. It's actually quite good to see him on the ResearchGate. So if you do want to check out all of those, then he's got everything on there, in fact. So do check that out. A lot of technical papers on habitat restoration, creation, and translocation. And he's given numerous presentations and technical workshops and conferences around this, and especially in terms of translocation, you may have come across a lot of work that he did to actually lead this in terms of practice in the UK. So John's not adverse to taking on challenges, not only the fact that he's been a past president of CIEEM, but also the fact that he took a challenge in 2019 to write about the climate emergency as a blog piece for CIEEM, which started to snowball and ended up with him getting local organisations in Shropshire to set 2030 dates for zero carbon, including his local parish council, Telford and Wrekin, and the Shropshire Wildlife Trust, Severn Gorge Countryside Trust. So this has just spiralled into partnership work and set him in good stead in terms of the fact that he became chair of the Habitat Creation Guidelines Working Group, and he's worked as an ecologist for the Freshwater Biological Association, University of Sydney, Telford Development Corporation, Natural England, Wardle Armstrong, and Atkins. So it's a breadth of expertise that comes to speak to us. So thank you very much, John. And do you want to give it, I suppose, an introduction to that need for guidance around ecological restoration and habitat creation?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Paul. I'm delighted to see 100 of our members. I have no presentation. I'm going to speak for, I hope, less than 5 minutes, and then it's thrown over to questions and answers, because the last thing you want to do is listen to talking heads. You want to ask your question. But I will set just a little bit of context. The Working Group for Good Practice Guidance for Ecological Restoration comprises members of the Ecological Restoration and Habitat Creation SIG. We are working with CIEEM to generate good practice guidance on habitat creation, restoration, and translocation, including general overarching principles. The SIG committee is of the opinion that the new competency standards involving habitat creation, restoration, and translocation could be developed by CIEEM once there's good practice guidance available. And the SIG committee will review this in the light of the current revision of the CIEEM competency framework. The need for good practice guidance, well, we've got 100 members here tonight, but the need for good practice guidance is demonstrated by the results from a survey of 900 plus ERHC SIG members undertaken in autumn 2021 by Drew Linus, who's our volunteer engagement officer. Advice was needed on habitat creation, habitat and species restoration, or habitat and species translocation by 46% of our members more than 10 times a year, and by 47% of members less than 10 times a year. The most frequent sources for advice on specific topics were colleagues, good practice guidance, and literature and online source searches. Other sources included the CIEEM Resource Hub, professional bodies, and voluntary organizations. The question, what can CIEEM do to help you with habitat creation and habitat and species restoration and translocation, generated 3 responses that demonstrate the need for good practice guidance. Firstly, biodiversity net gain will be mandated through the provisions of the Environment Act. And with COP26 providing a little bit more clarity around carbon markets, the use of habitat creation restoration as a nature-based solution within carbon markets, carbon trading, is set to grow. There is a window of opportunity for CIEEM and the SIG, that's the ERHC SIG, to really drive and set the agenda for best practice in habitat creation and restoration in the coming years, challenging standards, setting best practice, and filling knowledge gaps. Second response, support and publicize good and best practice. Third response, provide guidance on how to achieve target habitats in line with the DEFRA BNG metric. Species restoration, translocation, and reintroduction is not being dealt with at the moment, but I would expect the habitat sections of the forthcoming guidance to include words about some species. So far, we have drafted a what we're calling an interim 6-page document. It has an introduction, it has 10 good practice principles and their descriptors for ecological restoration, and a glossary with definitions of key terms. We expect that to be published by CIEEM later this year. To go with it, there will be a spreadsheet with what we think are the key 150 references for this particular subject. We have now started to work on the actual guidance itself. It's been divided up into overarching topics and habitat sections. The overarching topics include geology, geomorphology, soils and hydrology, landscape scale introduction, integration and recovery, ecosystem services and opportunities, project planning and implementation, and monitoring. the habitat sections that we are about to start on are grasslands, heathlands, and woodlands. And I think bog as well. The habitat areas that we are struggling to find people who will draft them or help to draft them. And I will just go through this because you might want to make a note. The habitat sections where we do need help are hedges, scrub, and scrub is important in the forthcoming BNG. Fresh waters, rivers, ponds, and lakes, fens, marshes, and swamps, coastal, intertidal, and marine, croplands, and what we are loosely calling artificial, constructed, and post-industrial sites and their habitats. That's everything from urban to clay tips, mounds, quarries, and infrastructure. That is all I really want to say by way of introduction. I am more than happy now to take your questions.
Okay, John. And sorry, Paul, if I can ask one question, just continuing on from something you mentioned there, because obviously BNG is a big sort of a big motivator linked to the need for the updated guidance or nice detailed guidance. I suppose just thinking about your breadth of sort of areas of expertise and experience, how different do you see the kind of requirements that are coming forward because of BNG compared to how practice on habitat creation's been in the past? Just because obviously it's not like we've not been doing habitat creation, it's just that in some ways it feels like it's much more detailed, and obviously there's legal requirements suddenly as well that's quite specific perhaps.
I think that's a fantastic question to which I genuinely don't have an answer. I think you having asked the question, I'm now thinking actually the working group needs to review its membership to make sure we have got people in there who are actively dealing with BNG at the moment. It isn't something which the committee has given sufficient thought to, and I think it must.
Yep, well, it's good we can note that down anyway, so we can make sure that gets taken down and circulates. Now we've had a couple of questions come through. One of them from Paul, so I can actually let Paul ask it if he wants. But as evidence might come up a couple of times, I suspect it might snowball a little.
Okay, John, fantastic start. Thanks very much. And just before to say, we have a couple of notes from people up in Scotland. Hope you're all right up there with the storm coming in. John, I'm not sure a few, two very high-profile public inquiries, or did you call them differently in Scotland? With a former president of the United States and another American billionaire trying to develop dunes. And your Penny Anderson's and yourself material was absolutely fantastic and crucial in the evidence. But I was really shocked, disappointed, disturbed. But that's natural situation with an environmentalist, isn't it? But to see that how thin the evidence really was with the post-translocation evidence about the success of things, and I was looking at very specific coastal habitats, how thin the evidence was to be able to argue the success rate. I think, I know it's marginal, but it's internationally important. Dune slacks and dune heath, two different inquiries. There was very little. So isn't this an opportunity somewhere to link in between this is a joint event between the academic special interest group and the ecological restoration habitat creation group? Isn't this where we need to be joining up expertise a little bit more? Because those type of projects, surely don't they create like fantastic academic projects, long-term monitoring, students, PhDs, etc.? What's your thoughts on that?
I think what you were asking, I've got a lot of rain here, was the links with the marine and coastal sea. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily. It's because the marine coastal SIG is mainly marine,
Okay.
and not. And my feet are drier than theirs, and
Okay.
so what it was, it's generally the opposite. It's how CIEM could support linking up consultancies and people who are project with academics to have continuity and build evidence and then publish it and make it out there, which could be used to inform future projects. Isn't there an opportunity there?
And what you're asking about is coastal, particularly coastal habitats.
Particularly coastal, from my experience, but I wonder how this might apply across the board. Just your thoughts.
I think there are two parts to the answer. One is that I would love the coastal and marine SIG to really push CIEEM to give more support for restoration of coastal habitats and marine habitats. We have already talked to the SIG Coastal and Marine SIG Committee to see if they can help with the coastal and intertidal and marine parts of our forthcoming guidance, and they don't have the expertise in the SIG committee. And I would very much welcome anyone who is interested and has experience of ecological restoration in coastal, intertidal and marine SIG to get in touch with me, because we desperately need to have those chapters being very, very robust, and to have the input from the coastal side into the 5 overarching topics. Otherwise, it's going to be unbalanced.
Sounds great. I'll be in touch, John.
I'm basically throwing it back, Paul, to everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, I think maybe we need to
that.
We need to kind of cast our net out, don't we, to fill the gaps.
I think we do, particularly as there's an awful lot of work now being done in coastal restoration, notwithstanding the ex-president of the United States and his catastrophic efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I think it's a kind of ongoing conversation as well about how we might be able to match up in terms of evidence and things. So perhaps watch this space for the members on this call as well. So we are getting some questions coming in, and I'll try and keep them in some kind of vague order as I can. But one of the ones that's come in is about the detail of the guidance, John. So is it more towards the how-to of creating habitats, or more about sort of focusing on just desired outcomes and things in terms of the guidance? How would you describe that to the people who are inquiring, and I suppose what that output will look like?
I think I am hoping that it will cover everything from the first idea that somebody has right through the whole of a particular project, project implementation, right through to management and monitoring. So I would envisage that one of the overarching topics is project planning and implementation, but I would expect all the habitat sections to cover everything from the beginning right through to the end. And I hope they will be written in such a way that they will be available to people with a wide range of backgrounds, a wide range of experience as well. It won't be written just for experts.
Everybody should be able to find something in there. And it kind of leads on to another question that obviously I know that there's been a parallel discussion with this, that guidance is one thing. Obviously, there's then a relevance to training and upskilling everybody, making sure people are using the guidance, and then that in effect we're checking that we're meeting our own standards, etc. So obviously one of the questions is just about are we aware of efforts to provide formal training courses? So do you want to say something about the discussions that have been starting up around that as well?
Well, at this point, I will come straight back to you, because it is you as the co-convener, you and Oliver as the co-conveners of the ERHC SIG committee, who've raised the issue of of training, and I think you're much better placed than I am
Okay.
because you've come up with the idea and you've given it much more thought than I have.
So yes, thank you, John. And I will
okay.
give a plug. I will give a plug to Ollie, who couldn't make it, unfortunately, tonight as well. And so it really has pushed the fact that obviously we're going to have a timeline for publishing this guidance. And obviously being prepared in the background and using CIEEM's process for training, so different sort of levels of training. So on one, it could be a bit of a spectrum. So we've got on one side introductory all the way through to more detailed sort of advanced masterclasses kind of side of things. But it's to actually have that planned. So what we'd probably see is some more outline sort of events and training coming out first, as in the background things are being detailed ready, so that there's sort of more detailed programs that can build on the guidance. So it's a fantastic question from Simon out there. So watch this space, because that's exactly what we'll be doing, and that's not just the SIG, that's the SIG sort of informing how we're examining that with the CIEEM Secretariat and all the staff as well. So yes, watch this space. It'll be an important part to sit alongside the guidance, hopefully. So John, one of the other questions was about plant health and disease and things within guidance and things. So somebody pointed out that often that comes sort of separately, not within guidelines and sort of documents around habitat creation, or it only gets a cursory mention. So have you got any thoughts about where that might need to sit within the guidance?
I think that's an excellent question. At the moment, I would hope that it's going into the project planning and implementation overarching topic, which includes various things, including services, archaeology, access, but I think plant health is something that should be taken into account, and that should then come back into the habitat sections. So whoever asked the question, thank you very much for reminding us.
Absolutely, we might. So that was actually, it's got full name actually, in fact, on that question. So that's Ruth from the James Hutton Institute. So thank you, Ruth, for that question. You can obviously get in touch with us.
I hope you're enjoying the rain and aren't too put out by it.
Yeah, hopefully it's not having too much of a big impact. Okay, so then just thinking about ecological restoration side of it and things, obviously there's a big emphasis around engaging stakeholders, which is clearly in the principles and things. How do you feel that sort of, I suppose, sits within practice at the moment? Do you think we give it enough consideration? Is there times when actually maybe it's not relevant? I don't know. I'm just wondering where you see that part sitting.
Again, I would expect it to be part of the overarching topics. I mean, involving stakeholders, however you call the stakeholders, whether it's the local residents around the site, the public, the local authorities, the regulators, it's absolutely fundamental. Anything being done to a site isn't going to work unless you have local buy-in, however that is called. Local stakeholders is fine, but there has to be stakeholder engagement.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think depending on the scale of the project, it'll probably change, how that influences practice. We've had an interesting question linked to the kind of metric side of this and fitting in with BNG. And I think, Aidan, I'm kind of reading this, that there's a lot of proposals in terms of lowland hay meadows being created on site, because obviously we know roughly at the moment suggestions are 90% sort of insetting for how developers are trying to incorporate BNG. So obviously that's got an influence on habitat creation, as in, will they get to a required standard to create, the specified habitat or the specified condition? Do you think there'll be quite an important sort of influence around guidelines and how we look at quality, perhaps, to what can be achieved on site if there's a lot of recreational pressure? You often see the phrase dog toilets, etc. Will they get to do that? And will there be, I suppose, enough enforcement to check it?
I am not in a position to comment about enforcement and local authorities. Most local authorities are in my experience, are understaffed. And I think they're going to find enforcing BNG extremely difficult. In general terms, I've done grassland restoration on public sites with dogs and everything else. In my view, the fundamental part of a good meadow restoration is soil chemistry. And I would refer you to a paper that I wrote last year in practice about that. If you want a high quality hay meadow, the soil chemistry has to be absolutely spot on. If the soil chemistry isn't, you will have to then essentially accept a lower quality of grassland restoration. But the reason that one of the overarching topics is geology, geomorphology, soils and hydrology is because the working group has recognized the fundamental role of soils and hydrology in obtaining high quality outputs.
John, you've led on to somebody else's question there, actually. Will the guidance touch upon soil ecology, chemistry, soil carbon, etc., and the importance and successful habitat creation? So hopefully you've just nicely boxed that question off, because it's been a clear discussion that it's going to be an important part of the guidance, and likely to influence discussions on a lot of the habitats, isn't it?
The answer is yes, and knowing there are definitely a great number of people on the working group for whom soils is extremely important, and soils and soil carbon is also extremely important. So I have no doubt that will be fully taken into account. Okay. Whether it delivers what everybody wants, I don't know, but we're certainly taking that into account.
Absolutely. Now, one of the questions is what's the timeline for publishing the guidelines?
Right, we hope to get the interim guidance, which is a six-page document, introduction, the 10 good practice principles and their descriptors for ecological restoration, and a glossary, and the references. We hope to get that out this year, i.e., essentially, let's say before December or early December. The overarching topics, there are the 5 overarching topics. We would like to launch them with the CIEEM Spring Conference, but I suspect that is being ambitious. So the fallback would be the CIEEM Summer Conference. The intention is to launch as many of the habitat sections as we have done by the autumn conference next year. The reason that we're linking it to conferences is to get the maximum amount of publicity, of social media coverage, and to make all our members aware of what is going on.
Absolutely. So that's basically by November 2024. Yes, that's the conference.
Yeah, but all the habitat sections won't be done by then. I think if we get 5 or 6, I think we'll have done very well.
Absolutely. So it's in a way, after that, it might well be a sort of rolling stock of a selection being published at a time. Also, watch out for those calls for volunteers, because that's what's going to speed up this process, or connecting up to the right people being able to write the guidelines.
Yes, and let me just say again, if anyone wants to get involved with writing the overarching topics or the habitat sections, can they get in touch with me or whoever sent where are we? Or Drew Linus? He sent the email, I think, for this Zoom session. Yep, please get in touch. You do not have to be a member of the Ecological Restoration and Habitat Creation SIG. You do not have to be a member of the academic SIG. We just need people who have got time and experience.
Absolutely, John. And they can also, I'm just checking so they can also email the SIG directly, because we have control over the email now. So I'll put that in the chat. If anybody has any questions after the event, wants to volunteer anything, then they can get in touch directly with the SIG. That's absolutely fine. Now, just looking, so one of the questions that I think it's going to be good to give a bit of clarity on: will the guidance be UK specific, or will it be applicable to Ireland as well? Because I know we've obviously discussed all the jurisdictions that CIEEM cover.
I'd like to think that it would be applicable to the island of Ireland as well. But that's something I think I would need to go back and check that we have taken that into account. So at the moment, I'm going to have to say Great Britain, but it's a good question and one I should have thought of coming up with a competent answer for, and I haven't. So the island of Ireland, yes, we will check.
I suppose that's something that we can almost review as the drafts are coming in. And it might be, I'm trying to think, I've lost the question now, but it might be one of those things that becomes the first update. Some principles are always going to transfer, but making sure we hit the right habitats, etc. There's always some specific, especially on distinctiveness and things. There's going to be some key details I would have thought that would become relevant in different jurisdictions. And
in fact, let me just capitalize on what you're saying, Tim. If anyone is here from the island of Ireland and wants to volunteer to get in touch, will you please email at the email that Tim has put out as a message?
Fantastic. Yep. So we're always scouting for those volunteers that can help in any technical way. So please do use that email. Now, one of the concerns somebody's highlighted here is about people feeling they don't have the competencies linked to specifying habitats and things, so that they find that the project team perhaps doesn't quite have the competencies involved to really speed the project along. So this was about considering the suitability of soil for soil mixes, for seed mixes, sorry. So I suppose this fits in a little bit with our rationale behind training, so that after the guidance and things, you mentioned about the competencies. So we are exploring that. That'll be part of the rationale for training and things as well. Try and tackle this. I suppose in the short term, that's not necessarily, that's going to take some time, isn't it? So it might be about how multidisciplinary those project teams are.
Yes, and I think as I've said before, we are absolutely behind soils as being the fundamental thing which needs to be taken into account on any restoration project. Soils and hydrology.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm just checking some emails, so I think there's almost a couple of conversations going on when people are messaging each other. One of the things I was going to ask is, I suppose, and it comes back to the evidence side of things again, because obviously we're going to have a bit of an unprecedented level of habitat creation, hopefully, in terms of BNG as well as nature-based solutions and everything else linked to nature recovery. Obviously, one of the things that has usually been difficult to get has been that information about failures as well. So I suppose, how important do you see that with informing sort of future updates of guidance and understanding standards?
I've always maintained that publishing failures is extremely important, but I can assure you that getting published papers or technical articles about failures is almost impossible. I have tried and failed. No reputable journal really wants to publish failures. I think in practice, almost certainly has as part of another article, but it's extremely important that failures that people understand why things have failed and publish it. I've got a background in habitat translocation, and one of the papers that I did manage to publish in a reasonably good journal was an explanation of about 30, 40 years ago, why the first half dozen translocation of high quality habitats, particularly meadows, failed. And that we actually got the journal to accept that. Reasons for that were essentially that either the technique was wrong, or the soils weren't taken into account, or the soils was wrong, or the management wasn't carried out afterwards. But publishing failure is extremely important. But I defy most people to get something published. So it therefore sits out in the grey literature.
Something
John,
sorry, Paul, go on.
I'm just going to jump in, John and Tim. The Academic Special Interest Group has recognised exactly that issue, and some of you may wish to look at some of our YouTube videos of these meetings that have been held recently, because we had a couple of them about celebrating failure, right, and the importance of that. All those challenges that John mentioned, but it might be worth, you might wish to look at the CIEEM YouTube channel and go over them. There was some really good debates about that.
Thank you. Yeah, something no doubt we'll carry on as well, and hopefully we can keep working on. Now, one of the questions that's come through, so I'm gonna join Paul, one of your questions, with a question that came in earlier that start linking on something similar. So Paul's pointed out the geomorphology, got a mention from you, and obviously it becomes crucial in certain habitats. Paul mentions dunes, obviously in terms of riverine systems and things, it's hugely influential. And then earlier somebody was mentioning about opening up outside of sort of the ecology sector. How important is it to get learning from, say, landscape architects and things who've been managing habitat creation schemes in various ways for a long time? So I suppose one of the questions is, often these people are members of different institutes. Where does the kind of guidance and involvement, do you think, come in terms of these guidelines and the work going on in the future? Where do you think that side of things might sit?
Trying to come up with a convincing answer to the question, I would like to think that the guidelines, when they're practiced, because they're going to be published online, can be updated at very regular intervals. So if we find that we have missed out something extremely important because we didn't know about some technical area, someone who was doing some work in another discipline, that can be incorporated in. We have no intention of publishing a paper version. This is an online version, which is available, in my view, like many of CIEEM's documents, it can be updated. And I'm absolutely certain that we will miss many things that people would want to see brought in, because ecologists and environmental managers are an extremely wide church, but it will be down to CIEEM's members to say, what about this? What about that? I've got a colleague in this academic discipline. What about the landscape architects? We have to be open to make changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll watch this space, I think, and obviously it's also about effort and where those other institutes, we know CIEEM often is working with the other institutes and things as well. So it's fair to say, I don't think that's sort of it is usually a bit of a conversation that's going on over a number of subjects. One of the questions that's come in is somebody who is a member of a local rewilding group and things, so they're often searching for guidance. So I suppose the question is then, do you think this is going to fit in with that, and is it going to reach that level, do you think? Is it going to be useful to community groups, I suppose, is the other question, or is it going to be heavily accessible really for more of an ecologist, less that sort of, I suppose, interested local community group?
That actually is a really interesting question, and I'm delighted that someone's asked the question, because I've done quite a bit of rewilding in the Ironbridge Gorge where I live. The answer is that the guidance will be aimed at ecologists and environmental managers, because that is what CIEEM represents. But I would very much hope that a variety of groups will be able to use the guidance either directly or with interpretation with the friendly local ecologist or environmental manager to explain the more complicated terms. The only way that we can make ecological restoration work into the long term is to involve a huge variety of people who aren't ecologists and environmental managers, but who are unbelievably enthusiastic in getting more wildlife, getting more nature, and countering the unbelievable losses of wildlife that we've had over the last 50 years.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the things it could be, I've scrolled past the question now, unfortunately, but if you're still out there in terms of asking the question, one of the challenges might be that is that something that, you know, is required of training, you know, and things, is it something that could be done once the guidance is out there that's sort of helping bridge a bit of a gap? So, because lots of these groups, in my experience, have a lot of very competent individuals, but they might just have questions linked to it, in which case there might be something that could be thought of. And obviously, if the members are coming forward, that might be needed, then it can be something that we think about, even if it's the SIG rather than central. And then one of the questions that's just come through, then, well, I suppose it's a bit more of a statement, John, but it fits into that multidisciplinary point, really. But how much do you think we'll have to sort of explore our practice in terms of good partnership working and communication? You know, once the guidance is out there, it's one thing ecologists knowing, but we're going to be, say, in a big, if it's BNG, it's going to be, it could be in quite a serious sort of project team for the scheme, and we're going to be communicating these guidelines to a whole range of planners, architects, hydrologists, solicitors, you know, you name it, they could be involved. How important, I suppose, do you see that part of using the guidance?
Well, what I'm going to do is say again what I said in my introduction, which was the answer that one of our members gave to the survey that Drew Linus organized in the autumn of 2021. And part of what they said was there's a window of opportunity for CIEEM and the SIG to really drive and set the agenda for best practice in habitat creation and restoration in the coming years, challenging standards, setting best practice, and filling knowledge gaps. CIEEM is committed to publishing this guidance, and if it's committed to publishing the guidance, it then has to really promote the guidance as well, because this is going to be so important for everything, for all the ecological restoration that's being currently carried out and that will be increasingly carried out over the next 10 years. We are in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. We are in the middle of a climate emergency. The two are linked. And the next 10 years does give us a chance to try and reverse the current trend. But we can't do it just as CIEEM. We can't do it just as ecologists and environmental managers. We have to involve a huge range of stakeholders, from the national country agencies right down to very, very local groups, church groups, local community groups, the Lions. The list is endless. Groups of just active local residents. Everyone is interested in land. Everyone is interested in nature. A lot of people are interested in creating, restoring nature, and particularly in rewilding.
Absolutely. And that was a good sort of, I suppose, drawing to a close there. Is there anything is there anything in particular that sort of drives your optimism, you know, to kind of move everything towards recovery? And then I'll pass over to Paul if he wants to round up. Just looking at the time now, we're at 10 to 7.
The broader answer to that question is yes. I am. Yes, I'm delighted you think I'm optimistic. I am optimistic, but CIEEM's bigger role actually is to give hope to people. The only way we're going to get through the biodiversity crisis and the climate emergency and the links between them is for us ecologists and environmental managers, to be positive and to give hope to people. Whether it's a local residents group, the Lions group, a church group, or county rewilding or county biodiversity action plan groups or catchment area ones, whatever level it is, we have an absolutely critical role as ecologists and environmental managers in giving people hope for the future.
Well, wow, Tim, that's a good point for us to think about. John, that's really inspirational. I work for a university called Liverpool Hope, for that reason, and I just like to pick up on the saying about this. We're providing guidance. We're in this fantastic professional institute, which has done and continues to do so much good to support our profession, to promote our profession, and this guidance is another step forward there. But we do need to engage with the diverse community that really get out there, try different things. I appeared in our Archdiocesan magazine, monthly magazine last week with this quote, and I wonder if this would be useful to John to pick up on your point to close about hope. I said, being an environmentalist and ecologist, you may have heard this before, it's a little bit like being Kermit the Frog. It's hard being green, right? It's hard being green, right? But it's worth it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So, we can all make a contribution. We can all do things in our own way. The fact that this topic tonight, John, that you've brought to us, it's been oversubscribed, right? Oversubscribed. So we know that this is a hot issue. We know that we need to make a response, right? But if you make a response, that means we have the responsibility as well. And we're the environmental professionals, the ecological professionals who have that responsibility. So, John, thank you so much for that tonight. Thank you, everyone, for coming along here and posing those questions. We have to be a critical community. We have to ask questions. We need to push the boundaries. That's our job as an institute. And I think we've done that tonight. But we've done that particularly with the help and guidance and inspiration from John Box. So let's give him a good round of applause and thank him for his contributions tonight. John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope some of my answers have answered your questions. I'm not certain that my answers will have answered all of your questions. And all I can say again is, if anyone wants to get involved in this working group for good practice guidance, will they please get in touch? And it can be any degree of experience. We've got people with limited experience who joined as assistants as essentially part of their working training.
Tim.
Absolutely. There we go. Thank you. I'll put the email again. So yeah, ecological ERHC. So it's just our initials of the SIG at CIEEM.net to get involved and watch this space. So thank you, John and Paul. Watch this space for the future guidelines being published, and the principles are the first thing.
Great. Those of you who are going to enjoy the rest of the evening, do your bit for recycling now and try and separate the wine from the glass. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Drew.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Cheers, everybody.